Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Matt. I'm Drunkety Skunkety on New Year's Eve, and I just wanted to talk about some of the best books I've read in the year of our Lord, 2019. I literally haven't written, even talking points for this video. I don't know what books I'm gonna mention. This is just, off the cuff. Is that the expression? I'm just curled up by my brand new fireplace, and yeah, I'm just gonna talk. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to film a lot of the end of the year content that I really wanted to do because I've been busy moving into this new place. But I figured I can at least do this one video talking about my favorite books of the year. These books, I think I'm gonna do just books that I read this year in 2019, not necessarily 2019 releases. However, a lot of them probably will be. So I guess we'll see. But the first book that I just need to get out of the way is Butan Ostra, my new favorite book. I finally got a new copy earlier today because I lent mine away and just ended up being a gift for that person. And the Diachenkos, they sent me a parcel, but it hasn't gotten here, and I'm not sure if it will. So I just got myself a copy, and I'll return it if I receive the parcel. But this book is technically, I believe, not a book I read in 2019. I think I read it on New Year's Eve day of 2018, and it's possible maybe I finished it drunk at 3 a.m. on New Year's Day, um, but I can't quite remember. But this book is just my new favorite book of all time. The way I describe it always is this is like a very creepy, ominous post-Soviet Union, I think early 2000s, anti-Harry Potter with very creepy, Lovecraftian slash House of Leaves vibes, as this girl, Sasha Smokina, is coerced into attending a kind of magical institute where she goes through a terrifying but exhilarating transformation as she learns about the true nature of reality. This is a very metaphysical book, and it's very mind bending, and I love it more than anything, and I want everybody to read it. Next up is actually another book from Marina and Sergei Diachenko, and that is The Scar. The Scar is a more fantasy feeling book. It actually takes place in a high fantasy world. And both of these two books actually deal a lot with the concept of transformation. And so in this book, there is this young military kind of braggart dude, and he is a class A douchebag. And in the beginning of this book, he sees a woman that he likes, but she has a fiance. And he's a soldier, and the fiance is just kind of like a bookish researcher nerd. And he, to be a dick, challenges this fiance to a duel and kills him, as if killing someone's fiance is gonna win her heart. But a man witnesses this and in turn challenges Eggert to a duel, and Eggert loses brutally, and the man cuts him on the cheek, creating a scar. And it turns out the scar is a curse, and slowly Eggert becomes more and more fearful of everything. He gets completely crippled by fear to the point where he's not able to eat with a knife because just holding a knife in his hand terrifies him. He's basically confined to all of these almost like OCD like quirks in order to feel safe in the world. And because of that, he goes through this very personal transformation where he's trying to get his life back and kind of cure this curse that's been laid on him. And it's just a really, really brilliant book. I absolutely loved it. And that is the reason that the Diachenkos are probably one of my new favorite authors, just behind Stephen Erickson. So yes, I'd also recommend this. And it's a Flaptraps cover. One of the best cover artists, I think his real name is Richard Anderson, it says here. And I absolutely love everything that he works on, including The Emperor's Blades by Brian Staveley, for example. And this next book that I have here. This is The Forgetting Moon by Brian Lee Durfee. I actually just saw Daniel Green did an unboxing the other day, and the author sent Daniel his two books. And this is thick, a thick epic fantasy series that I was a little bit lukewarm about in the beginning, but it just grew on me the more I read, and I absolutely loved it. This is a book that's a little bit hard to explain. But basically there's a map here, and it takes place on these five, I think, these five isles, and the people over here on Source Severe and the people to the west over here have been launching an invasion to kind of conquer the rest of this area, and their armies are very depraved. They do some really awful things, and there is this kind of myth of back in the day. There were these people called the Five Warrior Angels, and these warrior angels each wielded a specific weapon. One of them is a giant axe called the Forgetting Moon. One of the other weapons is called the Blackest Heart. It's a crossbow, I believe, if I remember correctly. But yes, so these five warrior angels have been revealed to be kind of real people in the world, almost reincarnations of them. And one by one, they're kind of regaining and coming into contact with their weapons. And this just really promises to be a fantastic series. I can't wait for the third book to come out, and I'd highly recommend it because, just like one of the next books I'm going to talk about, it is highly underrated, and more people need to read this. And again, the Flapjack's covers, he's just such a good artist. I absolutely love him. This next book that I'm going to talk about is going to be no surprise to a lot of people. It is The Ember Blade by Chris Whitting. This is the book that I'm just really passionate about because it objectively is just one of the best written books I think I've ever read. I feel like maybe some other people wouldn't go so far as to say that, but me personally, I've been going through this book. I think I've read it 3 or 4 times now, and I've been going through it kind of line by line at some point, studying how it's written to take pointers for how I want to write my own book. Because this book is a very character-driven book, but the plot doesn't really lag at all. It is a little bit slow to start, I guess, but he's kind of a master of pacing in the sense that in a character-driven story, the plot kind of falls by the wayside sometimes. But in this book, the pacing is just done fantastically once you get through this first little chunk. And along with that, this book has some of the best characterization I've ever come across. The two main characters are Aaron and Cade, and they are 2 young boys from a kind of smaller village. They are 2 boys from the country of Ossia, and Ossia has been under Croatan rule for the last 25 or so years. They've been occupied and kind of absorbed into the empire. And Aaron's father was actually a collaborator, and when the war was going south for the Ossian people, he betrayed them and joined the Croatans, and now he's a nobleman. And so Aaron has been raised to kind of be Croatan, while his best friend Cade is poor from a lower class, and he still maintains his Ossian roots. And so once these boys are sent to a prison camp, they fall in with a group of other characters later on, and these are a group of rebels that are trying to steal the standard of the Ossian country, the Ember Blade, and use this kind of banner of Ossia to rally people to their side to fight off their Croatan oppressors. And so this book ends up being a heist book, which was done really fantastic, and it had some Indiana Jones references, which kind of surprised me. But this characterization is just so perfectly done. We have a handful of characters in the Rebels, and then we also have Aaron, Cade, and Grub, and then 2 other characters who we meet, and they all kind of join together. But each of these characters is really given a lot of time to really kind of discover who they are, or for the reader, I mean, to discover who they are. Even kind of like a side minor character named Fen, she has kind of trust issues, and she doesn't want to rely on anybody, and we see why, and it's because her father did something incredibly fucked up to her when she was a girl. And I feel like in a lot of other books, a character like her wouldn't have been paid much attention. And so even the least developed characters in this book are more developed than a lot of characters I've seen as like protagonists in other series, which is just really fantastic to see. And so there's this one chapter, chapter 52, that I always talk about, and one of the side characters, Keel, gets reunited with his wife, who he has a very fiery relationship with, and once reunited, he learns that his little boy, his son, is actually very sick. And that chapter just really got me the way it was written. It really tugs on the heartstrings. And that is why I think Chris Whitting has cracked the code on how to write. Because I've read his other series, the Brave Path trilogy, and I started his Kitty J books. And the amount that Chris Whitting has grown as a writer is just truly astounding. And I was happy to learn that he actually writes for Ubisoft, and so I'm curious to know what game projects he's working on. But this is a book that I really can't recommend enough, and it's one of my favorite books that I've read this year. Another amazing book from 2019 is The Monster Brew Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. This is a series that I am just so in love with. This is a series that deals with colonialism. There is an empire in this world called the Masquerade, and they have kind of a stranglehold on the rest of the lands around them. They are masters of trade, and they've been colonizing the places surrounding them. And in the beginning of the first book, The Trader Brew Cormorant, Baru's people, her island people, get colonized by the Masquerade, and they deem Baru's people as savages because they're polyamorous, and so they try to like uplift them and educate them. And so Baru is sent to one of these masquerade schools and realizes that she's a savant. She's very fantastic with math, and so Baru wants to actually rise up within the ranks of the masquerade and tear it down from the inside. The series deals a lot with colonialism, but it deals a lot as well with power and how power can be used, how it can be twisted, and how it's kind of an illusion, but how it can be gained. It's just a fantastic series, and book 2 really took things up a notch. If you are reading book 1, I will say, however, that there was a point where I put the book down around, I'd say maybe 65 to 75%. I found it was really lagging, and I put the book down for like quite a while, like maybe a month or two before I finally picked it back up. But I am so glad I did, because the end of it just really blew me away. It shocked me. Baru is thrice a traitor in the first book, and it's just really fantastic. Baru wants to be sent to Falcrest, the kind of main province of Masquerade, but she instead is sent to the province of Ardwin, where she becomes the imperial accountant and has to contend with the dukes and duchesses of this country that's very restless. And there's a rebellion brewing in Ardwin, and Baru kind of follows the money to find the source of the rebellion. And Baru joins the rebellion, but we don't know if she's doing it so that she can join them and then betray them to the Empire to gain more power for herself, or we don't know if she's joining the rebellion because she hates the Empire, like she truly does, and she wants to join the rebellion to start tearing down the Empire that way. We just don't know with Baru, and that's something that I really like. And in book 2, that's even amplified, because Baru in book 1 takes a head wound, and she has contralateral blindness, and so she can't see out of one of her eyes. And it turns out she also has alien limb syndrome, and so it seems like this other half of her brain is thinking completely separate thoughts, which is very, very weird and kind of trippy and hard to explain properly. But something that's really interesting is part of the text in this book is actually right justified. Some of the text is shifted over to the right when it's the other side of Baru's brain thinking and kind of talking. And it was just a very interesting facet of this sequel. And this sequel just really, really blew me away. But this is one of the best books of 2019 by far, and I cannot wait for The Tyrant Baru Cormorant to come out. Another book that I sadly don't have because it seems like it's just not sold in Canada, so I should have got it when I was in Scotland when I first saw it there. But that book is Cage of Souls by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was a book that really, really surprised me. I listened to the audiobook of it, and I quite like the audio. The book is told in 5 parts, and it is about a man, Stefan Advani, who is sent to prison in the first chapter of the book. So in this world, it actually takes place on Earth, but very, very, very far in the future when humans have completely ruined the planet, and the planet's very toxic and hostile and barren, to the point that there is a single city left on Earth called Shadrapar that's home to 100,000 souls. That's all. That's the only population on Earth. And so Stefan Advani is sent from Shadrapar to a floating prison island ship thing floating in the middle of a very hostile and creepy jungle that's almost its own character. And while he's there, he meets some very crazy and creepy and just weird characters. And it's just a really fantastic story that I don't really want to get too deep into. But what I really like is how it's told in 5 parts. But parts 2 and parts 4 actually go back in detail his crimes that got him sent to prison in the first place in part 2, along with his early life. And part 4 details his time on the run from the authorities. And in that time, he spends months in the undercity of Shadrapar, which is really, really interesting. The city is built on layers and layers of ruins, basically, and so there's this entire network of an undercity that's just very, very creepy but fantastic to read about. And so he spent a lot of time down there. The only part of the book that I didn't like happened in part 4, and that is when he met a Soviet time traveler from 1974 sent into the future, who has been trapped in the future ever since. I found that a little bit jarring, even though I knew that this sci-fantasy story takes place in a far future Earth. It was just weird seeing an actual, like, remnant of this kind of 20th century being represented in this book. But aside from that, I loved pretty much everything about the book. The ending was a little, like, meta and weird, but that's something that I tend to enjoy. But even if you don't, I still think it'll be a satisfying and interesting ending for most of you. It's just a really interesting book, and it's very underrated. 2 other books that I don't want to get too deep into because these next 2 are books that I already talked about in my best standalones video. But 2 very great books I read this year were Middlegame and A Brightness Long Ago. Middlegame is a very interesting story. There's this woman named Asphodel Deborah Baker, and she was an alchemist, I think, like 150 or 200 years ago. She was kind of like the preeminent alchemist of the day, and she was doing very revolutionary stuff, but she wanted to embody these 2 kind of doctrines that made up the universe into physical form. And so she wanted to embody these 2 doctrines into actual children. Now, something happens in the very first chapter and she dies, but her henchman, who she created, lives on and tries to fulfill her dream for the next, like, century or whatever. And he eventually succeeds in embodying the doctrine in these 2 kids, Roger and Dodger. And Roger gets kind of language and symbols, while Dodger gets math. She sees the entire world as math, as like probabilities, and it's just a very interesting way she sees the world. But these 2 kids are separated at birth and kept apart until one day when they come together they'll have immense power. But one day Roger, as an 8-year-old, is struggling very badly with his math homework, and he hears a girl's voice in his head calling him stupid and telling him all the answers to his math homework. And that girl ends up being Dodger, and it turns out that these 2 kids are able to communicate telepathically. And so throughout the story, we see them grow from 8-year-olds, I think, into their mid-30s, and we see them come apart and get pulled together a couple times throughout the time span, but we see them learn more about their powers as they go through the book and as they journey along the improbable road, which is this aspect of the story. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically, if you know Shauna McGuire, she has a series called Wayward Children, about children who got sucked into portal fantasies and have returned to the normal world and are having a hard time adjusting, and so they're going to a school. But there's basically a Wayward Children novel within Middlegame about Avery and Zib and their journey along the improbable road. And this story is a book written by that alchemist Asphodel Deborah Baker. And it's actually a kind of secret code that is almost like a diagram that details the alchemical workings of the world. And it's disguised as a children's book. Now, something I find really interesting that I mentioned in my other video is that as soon as Shauna McGuire's editor finished Middlegame, he or she asked if she could write the story of Avery and Zib as a Wayward Children novel. And she said that she's way ahead of him. She had written it before she even started Middlegame. And I'm curious to see how it's going to be published, because it is like just objectively a Wayward Children's novel. However, one of Shauna McGuire's pen names is Asphodel Deborah Baker. And so, since this fictional character in Middlegame wrote the book, will it be published by that fictional character's name, which is a pen name, or will it be published as Shauna McGuire as a Wayward Children's novel? I assume probably the latter, but we'll see, and it's just an interesting aspect of the book. Along with that, there is A Brightness Long Ago by Guy Gabriel Kay, one of my favorite writers. He has the most beautiful prose I've ever come across. He's also objectively, like, in terms of technical skill, one of the best writers I've ever seen, along with Robin Hobb, whose books, unfortunately, I hate, if you saw one of my recent videos about her. But yes, this book takes place in his European kind of mythos, his European canon. And Kay writes historical fiction with a touch of fantasy, and it takes place in this world. It's heavily based on Europe and actual events. However, he tweaks the names and changes things. And so my favorite series by him is Sailing to Sarantium, book 1 in the Sarantine Mosaic duology. And so Kay has kind of reimagined Byzantium, Sarantium, Constantinople, Istanbul during the reign of Emperor Justinian in Sailing to Sarantium. And then later he has a book called Children of Earth and Sky that takes place far in the future, once Constantinople has fallen to the Ottomans and is now known as Asharius in his book. And so in A Brightness Long Ago, this actually kind of fills in the gap in between a little bit, and it takes place in Italy and follows these 3 characters. However, it actually follows the stories of 2 rival mercenary captains who used to be friends, but an event happened and now they kind of hate each other. However, they really respect each other, and they end up being kind of irrevocably drawn to each other over and over again. But we're seeing their story through the eyes of 3 separate characters who weave in and out of their tale. But near the end of A Brightness Long Ago, we actually see the fall of Sarantium to the Ottomans, and how it just kind of shook all of Europe at the time. And it was making me really emotional, because ever since reading Sailing to Sarantium, I've just been obsessed with Istanbul and all of its history. And I just found his writing so beautiful that I was just like tearing up and crying while driving through the Scottish Highlands on vacation with my family. But yes, he's one of my favorite writers. I absolutely love him, and this was a fantastic book. An honorable mention that I'm not going to talk too much about is Lies of Descent. That is in my underrated reads video. It's about this world that used to be kind of conquered by gods named Dragorans, and they have disappeared from the world because of this kind of war that shattered the world, and it's now far in the future, and there are some people who have Dragoran blood, and those people are taken to be trained at this island. And so these 2 children are taken from their families. However, one of the children is lost to these kind of Celtic shamanic people that are opposing the Dragorans. And this girl gets trained by them to be a dreamwalker, and as a dreamwalker, she can experience possible futures in her dreams. However, the other boy, he is still with the Dragoran, and they're planning to bring him to the school. However, he gets separated from him as well, and kind of goes on his own odyssey in order to get to the school. It's just a very, very interesting book. I thought it was very well written, and it was just a really fantastic debut that I didn't see coming whatsoever. It felt a bit to me like Evan Winter's The Rage of Dragons in terms of the debut that I don't know, I just didn't see it coming, and I was surprised at its quality. It's really, really good. I think you should check it out for yourselves, and you can see that more in my underrated reads video. One that I actually want to talk about in depth, and I think that's probably going to be the last one for this video because I've been talking for a long ass time, but it's actually two books. The first book is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is a Spanish author. It's been translated from Spanish into English and a whole bunch of other languages, but it takes place during the 1950s in Barcelona. And this is, again, kind of a weird story to talk about since there's a book within a book, much like also The Starless Sea, which I could mention, but I'm not going to. But in this book, there's a young boy named Daniel. He wakes up when he's like 4 and realizes that he can no longer remember his dead mother's face. And in order to kind of distract him from this, his father takes him to this place called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, which is on Calle Arco del Teatro, which I can picture since I used to live in Barcelona, and is one of the reasons I love this book so much. But there's just kind of this Cemetery of Forgotten Books that the author has imagined, and it's basically this hidden kind of cathedral that all of the walls are just made up of books that have been kind of forgotten and left to history and whatnot. And Daniel, he's able to choose a book, and it's supposed to be his responsibility to protect the book for the rest of his life. And the book is by a man named Julian Carax, and Daniel just gets very, very obsessed with him and wants to learn more and more about this kind of forgotten author. And as time goes on, we get further, deeper into his life when he's a teenager and an adult. And he learns more and more about this author, but then he learns that there's someone going around systematically burning, destroying every single copy of Julian Carax's books. And Daniel wants to know why, and this burned man named the Diablo, the devil, gets involved in the story, and it's just very, very interesting. But just last week, I read book 4 in the series. They're all kind of companion books, so you don't have to read them chronologically, so I only read book 1 and then book 4. And from what I know, those are the two that tie most closely together. But book 4 is called The Labyrinth of the Spirits, and this is a book that actually features Daniel again, while the other two don't, from what I know, anyway. The Labyrinth of the Spirits is initially about a woman named Alicia Gris, and she, as a child, while surviving the bombings in Barcelona during the Spanish Civil War, was rescued by Daniel's kind of like uncle slash friend character, Fermin, who you know from the first book. And so Alicia and Fermin have this kind of history together. And Alicia has grown up, and she now lives in Madrid, and she works for kind of their like central intelligence agency type thing. And she is drawn into this case of a missing politician named Mauricio Valls. He disappeared from Madrid a couple weeks ago, and Alicia is sent to Barcelona on his trail along with another cop named Vargas to figure out what's going on and to find him. But it turns out that there's a little bit of a conspiracy within Franco's regime, and as they learn more and more about this case, things just get more and more dangerous. It seems like they can't trust their own side, and so along with that whole story, we also get Alicia going and meeting Fermin, the man who saved her when she was a 6-year-old girl. And so she gets drawn into Fermin's circle along with Daniel from the first book. as she goes to the Semperi and Sons bookshop that Daniel's father owned. And so Alicia gets caught up in their kind of family drama and their history with Mauricio Valls. And it just kind of tied things together very, very nicely. And also, the final two chapters of The Labyrinth of the Spirits just wrapped things up in just the most perfect bow. It was just fantastic. I really, really loved it. And it is just one of the most atmospheric books I've ever read. It felt a lot to me like a Guy Gavriel Kay book, honestly, in the way it was written. The prose is fantastic. You can just feel Barcelona coming through the pages. I think even for someone who has never visited or lived there, I think that you'd still really get the sense of the city. But for me, having lived there after high school, I moved there for a year and a bit to go to art school while I lived with a Spanish boyfriend. And I just spent this year loving the city, absorbing it, and getting to read a book set in Barcelona was just such a treat. Zafon was talking about Paseo de Gracia, about Raval, Barrio Gótico, Tibidabo, just all of these places in Barcelona that I recognized. And so I could just picture the streets he was talking about. And it was just absolutely lovely. Labyrinth of the Spirits, I think I might like even more than The Shadow of the Wind, honestly. They are both fantastic, but I would highly recommend them. In fact, in order of the books I would recommend most, it would be Vida Nostra, The Ember Blade, and then The Shadow of the Wind, probably. But yeah, those are just some of the books from 2019 that I absolutely loved. I could have thrown in some others, like The Howling Dark by Christopher Ruocchio. I could have mentioned Starless Sea. I could have mentioned The Rage of Dragons, The Light of All That Falls, the final Lycanius book that came out very recently. Beneath the Twisted Trees. That's the 12 Kings and Sharakai book that came out not too long ago. The Gutter Prayer. That is a book that I also talk about in my If You Like This Game, Try This Book video. If you like the game Bloodborne, the book The Gutter Prayer would be perfect for you. It was very fantastic. But I'm going to shut up now because I've been talking for like almost an hour at this point. I have a lot of footage. But yeah, those are just some of my favorite books from 2019. I'm sure there are others that I haven't thought of since I didn't do any preparation for this video whatsoever. But hopefully you check out some of these books that I've mentioned and let me know what you think. The whole point of this channel is to get you guys to pick up some underrated books that you probably haven't heard of otherwise, like Cage of Souls or The Ember Blade. But yeah, so if you pick any of these up, please let me know. And tell me down below what were your favorite books of 2019. I would love to know so that I can read them because I am in a little bit of a drought at the moment. Happy New Year, everyone, and I hope 2020 is a great year for you.